What is up, everyone? Welcome back to Tidal Gardens. One of the defining features of our coral farm is the use of aluminum stands. In almost every video where we show our tanks, someone in the comments asks a question about these stands. This video is intended to give a basic overview of these stands, but then I wanted to talk about some of these finer details. Also, this video is sponsored by Alufab. They are a local company here in Ohio that made most of these stands for us. Any stand we've needed for about the past 3 years now, we've purchased from them, and as such, we are very familiar with their products. But I wanted to be very transparent that we received 3 small stands as a part of this promotion to highlight some of the newer options that they provide. Now that we have that out of the way, let's start at the very beginning. I think it's safe to say that we were a very early adopter of this style of stand. Originally, I saw these in a magazine before this building was complete, so I don't know, about 5 years ago. Clearly, I was not the first person to ever use them for this application, but I was definitely one of the first to popularize it on a facility of this size. In the past, we would use either wooden stands or in the greenhouse, we set tanks upon concrete cinder blocks. But when it came to this new building, I wanted a much more polished look. That, more than anything, was the goal. I wanted better aesthetics versus what we did in the past. But after using these aluminum stands over the years, there are a lot of benefits to using aluminum over wood or cinder blocks. The first big benefit is how tight the tolerances are. It is manufactured to ultra tight tolerances, like down to the millimeter. So when you're assembling these stands, if the stand is just not coming together right, I learned to just not force it. The measurements are exact. So I know now that I have to kind of back off, loosen some of the bolts, tweak it slightly, and then get it all to fit. And when you do that, you get this perfect solid fit. There's no wiggle room at all. This is assuming, of course, that you're getting it professionally cut and then shipped to you as a kit. I know that there's some folks out there that want to save money and buy full lengths of the stuff and cut it by yourself. That seems like a perfectly reasonable option, but I am not that dude. I want a complete kit, but it is possible for those out there that want a more of a DIY project. Also, the fact that it is shipped as a kit is really nice because the first 10 stands that we got were not from Alufab, it was from a different provider altogether. All of those stands just came in bulk. So they were packaged like, okay, all these lengths came together, all these screws were in a single bag, all those inserts are in single bags. It was really difficult to figure out, okay, which parts go to which stands because it's 10 different stands. So at some point when we were just going through, it's like, we ran out of such and such part because we used the wrong part entirely. We had to take all the stands apart and redo it with, I don't know, the correct fittings. Anyway, it was kind of a hassle. So one of the perks with going with Alufab is they package everything by the stand as a single kit. So if you order 5 stands, you get 5 kits. Very convenient. All right, second benefit. Aluminum T-slot is a lot more durable than I expected in saltwater applications. Before I ever had an aluminum stand, I really didn't know what to expect about its durability being around reef aquariums. It's not like wood or concrete block was particularly durable, but I was at least familiar with it and I knew what to expect. Like the wood over time would break down, warp, whatever, and I would likely have to replace it after maybe 10 years. Long time granted, that's why, a lot of people use wood. Cinder block was heavy, awful to move around, awful to stack, always be super tricky to get level, and over time it would kind of just break apart as it aged. Clearly, these materials aren't perfect, but I knew what I was getting myself into. I had 2 concerns about these aluminum stands. First is, will this material rust when you get salt water on it? Turns out aluminum doesn't rust, but it does corrode. And the difference there is that this corrosion will come in the form of like this chalky dust. It's not a big deal. I've used it now for years, and if you make any effort to wipe up spills, the stands will look brand new. I do try to wipe up obvious spills, but we are not insanely fastidious about it. There is a 3-year gap from the very first stands that we got to the last stands that we installed. And I promise you that nobody would be able to tell which are which. They simply do not show age. Maybe in like the design of the stands, but not from corrosion. So speaking of design, that brings me to that second concern. The big question being, would these stands be able to hold these heavy aquariums? So it turns out a well-designed stand is more than capable of holding whatever kind of tank that you want to put on it. If you really want, I'm sure there's engineering software that people would be happy to use in designing something like this, but for the price of that service, you can just make a beefier stand and not worry about it at all. That's just me though. But that was the concern going in. Now I don't have any such worries because the first stands that I installed used a relatively, how would I say, svelte 1.5 by 1.5 profile T slot, and we were putting 300-gallon tanks on them. These tanks were 3/4 inch glass, so mind you, they were incredibly heavy. And then when you fill it up with salt water, that's another 8.5 pounds per gallon. It's a lot of weight. These stands had no issues whatsoever. My original designs involved using these 45-degree braces. After living with these stands a while, I kinda didn't love the 45s because they are obstacles to some degree when I'm trying to install mounting plates for pump controllers or drip trays for external pumps, things of that sort. They also made wire management ever so slightly trickier. Now, these are design nitpicks, and I am sure that the structural benefits of having them greatly outweighs the downsides I just mentioned. However, if you, like me, really want to avoid them, there are options. One option is to use gussets, which, I don't know, probably aren't quite as robust structurally, but they are a much lower profile. Another option is just to go extra beefy with the extrusion itself. Instead of 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch, you could go with 3 inch by 1.5 inch, or even 3 inch by 3 inch. That 3 inch by 3 inch is extra beefy, and it's what we used for the majority of our tanks that are over 500 gallons. So we have 7 of those in total. If you are still kept up at night, or if you have a tank over, I don't know, 1,000 gallons and wanted to make extra sure that it was structurally sound, there are even thicker profiles available. And at that point, you could probably park a truck on that stand. If you talk to Alufab, they can give you a starting point and you can tweak it to your particular application. So, for example, when I commission a stand, one thing that I insist upon is that there's no obstruction in the front, that it makes installing something like a sump easier, or basically just being able to have full access to the bottom area without any center post in the way. So on this stand, for example, there are 5 legs, the 4 corners, and the one in the middle on the back. Would it be more sturdy if there was a leg in the front as well? Yes. But again, I wanted complete unfettered access to the sump, so to make up for it, I went with a thicker profile T-slot extrusion. The other thing that we like to do is install leveling casters on everything. This is probably the one design element that we get the most questions about. Let me just say up front that they are amazing and you should design your stand with them, period. But let's talk about it. I will never build an aluminum stand without these things. They are made by a Korean company called Footmaster. They come in a bunch of different models and sizes. I am particular to the second largest one that they make, which is the model number GD120F. The F stands for the flange that you're going to use to install it onto a base plate. The GD120F is rated for 2,200 pounds per caster, and it's 4,400 pounds for a set of 4. Not sure how that math works, but that's the stated weight load, which is, I'm going to go ahead and guess, overkill for most applications out there. Now, I am also assuming that those weight ratings are with the leveling foot down and not resting on the wheel. Just an assumption on my part though, because the wheel assembly is really beefy. I mean, it is like a solid block of aluminum. The obvious benefit for having casters on your stand is that you can very easily move that stand into place, and then you lower the leveling foot down to get the wheels off of the ground. I would not recommend trying to move a tank with water in it. I've never tried it, just seems like a really bad idea. The way that we used it was mainly for our biggest tanks. We would roll the stands all the way to the front of the building and load them up right there, and then roll that tank and stand assembly into place for their final location. Once they're set in place, they get hard plumbed. After that, they stay there and never move again. Just that one single move makes it worth the price of admission because once you get that tank onto the stand, it is so easy to move. You can move the whole thing with one finger. Even the finest micro adjustments became a breeze. Our tanks, for example, are perfectly in line with one another over the distance of about 120 feet because we were able to make those micro adjustments with a laser sight. Also, they were super easy to level perfectly because of the feet. In the past, we would have to mess with shims and stuff like that, but that was just simply a nightmare. With these, all you have to do is turn a nut in the foot assembly and you can just get that level perfect. While we can't move our really big tanks anymore without cutting out the plumbing to the sump and whatnot, our smaller setups, where the sump is located right underneath the tanks, those can be moved really easily. Just drain the tanks, raise the feet up, and they can just be moved around really easily. I did mention earlier that the size we went with pretty much across the board was the GD120F, which again, that's their second largest weight load. If you wanted to go mega overkill, they also make a GD150F, which is this monster. These are rated for 3,300 pounds each. I happen to have this low profile stand for this sump, and it is not necessary for this application. Not necessary at all. I happen to buy these things separately on eBay way back in the day. They were just sitting on a shelf. I said, let's just make a stand for a sump. Heck, why not? I don't even think I need to put the feet down. I think that this sump, completely full of water, can very easily just rest on these wheels forever. And one day when I need to move it around, easy peasy. If you have a monster aquarium, the upgrade to the GD 150, I think it's like $20 per caster. It's like a no-brainer. Let's talk a little bit about aesthetics. I happen to love the look of this coral farm because of how industrial it is. We have all this equipment in plain sight, but went really hard on wire management to clean up the appearance. This works great for a coral farm, but I understand that this look certainly isn't for everyone. Even if you happen to like this ultra industrial look, your significant other might not. Again, this is in a coral farm, it is not in a living room. Luckily, Alufab is working on a few projects that can help out with that. First off, we have mostly powder coated silver stands and white casters. You could go with a powder coated black stand as well as black Footmaster casters. That upgrade right there makes the stand much, much less noticeable visually. Also, there are these aluminum decorative panels that you could go with. These panels are removable for tank maintenance and snap in with magnets. I don't know how many colors or patterns that these come in, but I imagine there are all different sorts. I chose a dark gray wood grain for these particular stands. One of the best aspects of these aluminum stands is just how customizable they are. So far, everything that I've shown you is really rudimentary. I mean, it doesn't exactly get any simpler than a table, right? But I wanted to leave you with some possible design choices just to get the imagination working. One thing we never seem to have enough of is just space around the tank to set things on. I've spoken in other videos about how nice it is to have a Euro brace around the tank, But one of my biggest pet peeves here is when people put drills and stuff like electrical devices on a glass Euro brace. Because every now and again, one of those things goes for a swim. I'm not all that happy about that. It's not my favorite thing. Just having a utility shelf would be super nice right then and there. On this stand, we have a side shelf. It's a small detail, but super helpful, again, just to set stuff on. This particular one has that same aluminum panel, but if you wanted to get really crazy, you could get like a custom countertop in quartz, like we did with our packing station, for example. I don't ever see this, but I think a U-shaped shelf going around the sides in front of an aquarium would be super cool. Granted, Alufab obviously doesn't do the quartz countertop stuff, and the stand would have to be designed for that in mind. Again, this is just a discussion to get the creativity going. The other new utility element is pull-out drawer slides. They can be used for storage, but I think a really cool use for them would be to size them hefty enough to hold a sump. I think some of the heavy-duty drawer slides can handle like hundreds of pounds, so you can imagine being able to slide an entire sump out for easy maintenance. One of like my biggest annoyances to having a sump underneath a tank is working on that sump in such a cramped space. How cool would it be just to pull it out for easy access to all the equipment and the light, being able to actually see into it, see all the details? Perfect application for something like drawer slides. Last thing that I'll mention about these stands isn't so much about the stands themselves, but what to put between the stands and your tank. It's a good practice to put what I would call a structural layer and then a squish layer. The structural layer is to distribute the weight evenly across the bottom of the tank to avoid any weird bowing or stress points that you get from contacting the stand. The squish layer is a soft layer that conforms to the tank just in case there's some sort of debris like a rock or something like that that could be a pressure point and break the tank. The squish layer has just enough give to it that it takes all the pressure off of the glass or acrylic. Talking first about the structural layer, a lot of people like to go with marine grade plywood that's primed and painted. It's a perfectly good option, and a lot of people have used exactly this solution over the years. Tried and true. When I was putting together this farm, though, I didn't want any kind of wood in that location because it will get wet and over time it's going to show its age. Is that a problem? No. But I figure, you know what? Just do it right once and never think about it again. What I like to use instead of marine grade plywood is a layer of type 1 PVC sheet. For most tanks, you can get away with about a ½ inch thickness, but for our largest tanks in that 500 to 600 gallon range, we went with a 3/4 inch thick sheet. Gonna warn you in advance, it is both heavy and shockingly expensive, but in my opinion, it's the gold standard. As for the squish layer, a lot of people end up using some kind of insulating foam, which again is fine. I decided to go with closed cell foam. Now, closed cell foam, as opposed to open cell foam, is completely waterproof, and this particular density can hold 4 pounds per square inch. When you do the math on that, it is not going to collapse under the weight of a normal sized aquarium. It's only when you get into something crazy like a 72-inch tall tank or something, then you might need something else. But for most everyone else, you don't have to deal with that. 4-pound closed cell foam, it's going to be great. All right, guys, that does it from here. Thanks again to Alufab for sponsoring this video and providing us these 3 stands. If you would like to get a custom aluminum stand from them, I invite you to visit them at alufabstands.com and use the promo code Tidal Gardens for a 10% discount. Okay, guys, until next time, happy reefing.